My name is Salsabil Yakoubi, and my work focuses on digital governance, inclusion, and people's identities in public systems. This presentation looks at the hidden layer of digital inclusion, whether internet systems can recognize multilingual users through the names, domain names, and email addresses they use. I use the Mediterranean as a lens because it brings together multilingualism, migration, and reliance on digital tools and services. So the question here is not only who can get online, but who is fully recognized once they are online. The starting point is personal and simple. What happens when the internet rejects your name? So Arabic is my mother tongue, and this example uses my own name in Arabic. The email address is also in an Arabic script. When a valid name or email is rejected because a system assumes Latin characters, exclusion begins and at the first field. This may look like a small technical issue, but in practice, it can block registration, applications, account confirmation, and communication. The Mediterranean is useful for this question because it concentrates several pressures at once, from script diversity, migration, and dependence on digital systems. Many writing systems are present and historically rooted here, including Arabic, Greek, Hebrew, Syriac, Samaritan, Tifinagh, Coptic heritage, Armenian, Cyrillic, and Latin scripts with Deltrix, and these are just a few. Of course, the mobility dimension makes this issue much more urgent. There is no single total number for regular or irregular migration across the Mediterranean, but the scale is visible from two data points or two indicators, one of them being the EU, which registered around 64 million migrants in 2025, and UNHCR recorded irregular arrivals through the Mediterranean for more than 150,000. So movement across the region often requires urgent interaction with digital systems, from asylum information to education, housing, work, health, and of course, municipal services. The key shift here is from language access to system recognition. A platform can be translated and still exclude users. So the question is not only whether users understand the system, but whether the system can recognize them. A user may read the page, but still be blocked if their email address is rejected, or their name cannot be entered correctly, or their identifier is not processed. So why translation alone is not enough? People do need to act through digital systems because they need to register, authenticate, receive updates, apply, and communicate. When systems do not support people's scripts, users often adapt. One example is Arabizi, where Arabic is written using Latin characters and numbers and digital communication. Here you can see an example of that. But this workaround can be creative and practical, but it's not the same as inclusion. It means users carry the burden of improbability instead of systems being designed to accommodate them. So in migration context, this burden can be especially serious because people may already face uncertainty, urgency, and unequal access to institutional support. And universal acceptance means that, of course, here, all valid domain names and email addresses should work across systems, regardless of script, language, or length. But in practice, a system must accept, validate, store, process, and display valid identifiers. Failure can happen at any stage. A form may reject the input, a database may fail to store characters correctly, a platform may display the identifiers in a way that users cannot recognize, and the identifiers may be technically valid but practically unusable. So this is where inclusion breaks down. But it's also a trust issue. If users cannot recognize the domain name or email displayed to them, they may not know whether the service is actually legitimate. These failures appear in ordinary user journeys. A valid email address may work in one system but fail in another. A browser may reject or misread an internationalized domain name. And a platform may also display an encoded version instead of actually readable text. These inconsistencies reduce usability and trust and can create practical risks. For a student, worker, or person moving across borders, this can mean losing access to a portal, missing an appointment, and being unable to complete an application. So small technical failures can actually become larger institutional barriers. The evidence shows real progress, but not actual parity. So ICANN's 2025 IDN report shows 151 internationalized top-level domains representing 37 languages across 23 scripts, with root zone support expanding towards 27 scripts. So the naming layer is becoming more multilingual, but application readiness still lags. UNESCO and ICANN report that only 10% of the top 1,000 websites accept IDNs and only 22% of global email services under generic top-level domains support local language emails. Also, website testing shows the same gap. So fully local language email acceptance increased from around 8% to 14%, but that's still far behind the ASCII-based formats. This is where ICANN's role becomes even clearer. So the domain name system, or DNS, allows people to navigate the internet using names instead of numerical addresses. And internationalized domain names, or IDNs, allow those names to exist in different scripts. Email address internalization, or EAI, extends this logic to email addresses. ICANN account now supports sign up and sign in with internationalized email addresses in local languages and scripts. And ICANN and UNESCO also support Universal Acceptance Day, curriculum work, and expert guidance. So the direction is indeed positive, but the challenge is wider adoption across everyday systems. The next step is to move from progress to normal practice. First, universal acceptance readiness should become a standard requirement in public sector procurement and digital public infrastructure. Second, high-impact systems should be tested regularly: forms, databases, identity systems, email services, and public portals. Third, technical training should reach the developers, system administrators, universities, and public sector digital teams. And of course, fourth, local initiatives should help communities test the systems they actually depend on, because the goal is not only to build multilingual identifiers, but it's to make them work reliably where people need them the most. So the conclusion is simple: a multilingual internet must not only display languages, it must also recognize multilingual users. Universal acceptance connects technical infrastructure with real-world inclusion, but without recognition, participation remains incomplete. So for ICANN and its community, universal acceptance is part of building an internet that remains global, interoperable, trusted, and usable across languages, scripts, and communities. That is it. These are the sources if anyone wants to read more about it. And thank you.
Thank you, Salsabil. Wonderful presentation. We do have a question.
Hi, this is Barry Liba. What is your sense of why we're not already there? What are the barriers to universal acceptance that we have to cross?
I do think that, of course, ICANN has done wonderful work on the naming layer, but it's more the take-up. So I think that a coordinating entity they could support, for example, creating a readiness level, maybe like tests. So actual high-level systems could use to test how ready they are for universal acceptance. Also for government portals, that's also important to help them, for example, with public procurement of digital systems, to choose the systems that are right for them, that are the most inclusive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Salsabil? Alfredo, yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. Now, I do have a question for you. Today, we had a session this morning on universal acceptance and different initiatives that are going on. What do you feel or perceive as the impact that universal acceptance is having in the new round of UTLDs that's been opened for the underserved communities that would like to apply for a top-level domain, but they can't because of the lack of their scripts that they can use?
Is, of course, universal acceptance has been being pushed by ICANN for the past 10 years since there was a working committee. And then that recently, since 2025, changed basically the objective, not just from the actual naming system but now towards application. So yes, I think ICANN could help provide the necessary training, the necessary knowledge for these local initiatives. Also, of course, it's a lot to tackle. I think collaborating and really helping them test what's right and what works for them based on the priorities that local community prioritizes and what they actually need. What does that local community, what are the websites they actually use?
Thank you.